All right, so today we're doing something a little different. We're taking two things that, on the surface, seem totally unrelated, and we're going to see what happens when we kind of smash them together.
Ooh, sounds intriguing. I like where this is going.
Right. So, in one corner, we've got this really fun, kind of wild 18th century novel called The Adventures of Ferdinand Count Fathom by Tobias Smollett.
Okay, I've heard of Smollett.
Yeah, he's great. And in the other corner, we have The Law of One, which is this collection of channeled messages from, well, they say a higher intelligence.
All right, so a classic novel and some channeled wisdom. What's the connection? What are we diving into?
That's the fun part. We're going to use these two sources, this fictional world and this, let's call it a cosmic perspective, to look at some really big ideas.
Big ideas.
Like deception, morality, the way societies are structured, and even some pretty trippy cosmic takes on what it means to be human. So, for you listening, if you're all about getting to the core of things quickly, this deep dive is for you. We're going to explore these big ideas in a way that's both efficient and hopefully mind expanding.
I like that. Efficient and mind expanding. Sounds like a winning combination.
Totally. So, ready to jump into the adventures of Ferdinand Count Fathom?
Absolutely. Let's see what this Fathom character is all about.
Okay, so picture this. 1753, Smollett publishes this novel, his third one, and even back then, people thought it was pretty out there.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, another writer at the time, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, she pointed out how different it was from Smollett's earlier work. Those were often based on his own life. This one, she said, felt more like he was building a story, inventing it from scratch.
Interesting. So less autobiography, more imagination.
Exactly. And at the center of this invented story is Ferdinand Count Fathom, a guy who's basically a professional schemer, always looking for an angle.
Sounds like a charming fellow.
Right. But what's really interesting is how he sees the world. He just assumes everyone else is as morally flexible as he is.
So he thinks everyone's playing the same game, just maybe not as well as he is.
That's it. And that belief that everyone's kind of crooked, it's what lets him justify all his crazy manipulations.
I see. It's like his own lack of morals becomes his lens for viewing everyone else.
Yeah, it's a bit bleak when you think about it. But it makes for a great story.
I can imagine. So how does this all play out in the novel? Give me an example of Fathom in action.
Well, early on, he teams up with this woman, Teresa. They're like partners in crime, you know?
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of crimes are we talking about?
Their first big con is this plan to cheat a young woman, a mademoiselle, out of her money at cards. And what struck me is how they talk about it. Like there's zero moral conflict. It's just business.
Wow. No guilt, no second thoughts, just cold, hard calculation.
Exactly. But even in this kind of twisted partnership, you see that Teresa, she's no fool. She knows what Fathom's like, so she makes him secretly marry her for security.
Smart move. She knows he's not exactly the trustworthy type.
Right. She's like, I'm not going to be another one of your victims, buddy. And the way Fathom handles her, it shows he's got this really sharp, almost scary understanding of human nature. The narrator even says he's like a master at reading people.
So he's using this insight for his own selfish purposes, of course. But is he ever wrong? About people, I mean.
Not really, it seems. Like when he's figuring out how to manipulate Teresa, it's like he knows exactly what buttons to push.
So a gifted manipulator, but with zero moral compass? What other schemes does he cook up?
Oh, he's just getting started. There's this whole elaborate scheme where they take advantage of the trust that people have in Teresa. They convince this mademoiselle that one of her servants is stealing from her.
So they frame an innocent person.
Yep. Teresa pretends to be all loyal and concerned while she's actually, helping Fathom siphon off the mademoiselle's valuables.
Classic. They're playing everyone.
Oh, and it gets even better. Fathom's like, let's bring in the authorities, make it super convincing.
Bold move. I mean, that's adding another layer of deception.
Right. And it totally works. They shift the blame. Suspicion even falls on the old Count's own son, Ronaldo.
Wow. They're really good at what they do, which is, of course, a terrible thing.
It really is. Thinking about the law of one and that whole idea of unity and interconnectedness, you can see how Fathom and Teresa are totally operating from a place of separation. They see these other people as pawns, not as, part of the same universal energy.
Yeah, that's a great point. They're so deep in the illusion of separateness, it's like they can't even see the bigger picture.
Right. And this whole idea of illusion and interconnectedness, it's something that comes up a lot in the law of one. But before we get to that, let's talk about what Fathom does next.
Okay, I'm all ears. What fresh hell does he unleash now?
So Fathom, ever the opportunist, manages to charm his way into the good graces of the old Count.
Oh, no. I can already see this going badly.
You got it. The Count, he's completely fooled by Fathom's act. He thinks Fathom's this wise, virtuous guy.
I bet.
So what does he do? He entrusts Fathom with the moral education of his son, Ronaldo. They're sent off to Vienna together.
Oh, the irony. The guy who's a walking moral hazard is tasked with instilling morality in another person.
Exactly. And of course, Fathom's already scheming about how to exploit Ronaldo for his own profit.
I can't even. This guy is unbelievable.
Right. It really makes you think about how easily trust can be broken, especially when someone's so good at putting on a convincing act. Like, how do you tell if someone's intentions are genuine?
Especially in a world where appearances seem to matter so much. And I mean, doesn't that connect to what we were just talking about, that whole idea of illusion from the law of one? Like, are we all just buying into these appearances, missing the deeper reality?
That's a great question. Maybe Fathom's success is less about his cleverness and more about how easily we're all fooled by appearances, right?
It's like he's exploiting a fundamental flaw in how we perceive the world.
Anyway, back to Vienna. Fathom, he doesn't waste any time. He starts setting up these rigged gambling situations where Ronaldo ends up losing huge sums of money.
No surprise there. He's basically preying on Ronaldo's naivety.
And the money Ronaldo's losing, it's the money his dad's sending him to live on. There's always some shady gambler hanging around, egging Ronaldo on, keeping him at the table.
It's like a well-oiled machine of deception and manipulation. But Fathom wants more than just money, right? He's after something else, too.
You're right. He's got social ambitions. He wants to be part of this elite world, the world of gallantry, as he calls it. But there's a problem.
Let me guess. His past is catching up to him.
Sort of. He realizes that no matter how charming or skilled he is, his lack of a fancy title, his obscure birth, it's holding him back.
So even in a world of schemers and manipulators, pedigree still matters.
Totally. Like, you can't just fake your way into the upper crust. You have to be born into it.
It's like these societal rules are just another layer of the illusion. Like, from the law of one perspective, those distinctions are meaningless. We're all part of the same energy field, right?
Absolutely. It's just these arbitrary rules that create these artificial barriers between people. And Fathom keeps bumping up against them. Like, there's this scene where this lady wants to give him this valuable chain as a thank you, but instead of just accepting it, he puts on this whole show about not wanting to appear greedy.
He's playing the reluctant hero.
Totally. He knows exactly what he's doing. He ends up getting the chain anyway, but he's also crafted this image of himself as this noble guy.
He's so good at manipulating people's perceptions.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's playing a character all the time. Like he's in a play.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And then there's this whole thing with this, I guess you'd call her a stepmother character. She sees right through him, figures out he's up to no good.
Oh, someone's onto him.
She tries to set a trap for him, but he's too clever. He escapes using what the narrator calls his good genius.
Good genius. You mean his talent for being a con artist?
Pretty much. It's like he always has a trick up his sleeve, always a way to wriggle out of trouble.
Resourceful? You got to give him that.
Totally. And this ability to think on his feet, it comes in handy even when he's facing like real danger, like during the siege of Fort Kiel.
The siege. Now that sounds serious.
It was brutal. But Fathom, he's not about to put himself in harm's way.
Let me guess. He fakes an illness.
You know it. He dodges military duty, avoids all the hardship while everyone else is risking their lives.
Typical Fathom. Always looking out for number one.
It's kind of amazing how consistent he is. And from the law of one perspective, it's like another example of his separation, right? Like he can't even be bothered to share in the collective suffering.
Yeah, it's all about him, his needs, his safety, his comfort.
Okay, ready for maybe his most audacious move?
After all this, I don't know if I am, but hit me with it.
He steals Ronaldo's jewels and money.
No way.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Seriously. But he doesn't just take them. He stages this whole scene. He breaks open locks, throws stuff around, then acts like he's completely lost it.
He pretends to have a breakdown.
A total meltdown. He's distraught, delirious, even accuses Ronaldo of being the thief.
Wait, he's blaming the victim.
It's incredible, right? He flips the entire situation, using his acting skills to not only steal, but also gain sympathy.
The audacity of this guy. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. And he's so good at adapting his persona to fit different situations. Like, he's smooth and charming with this Westphalian count, then all tough and military with this Dutch officer, then super polite with this English knight. He even senses that the English guy is suspicious and changes his tactics accordingly.
He's a master of social camouflage.
Right. He blends in wherever he goes, figures out people's weaknesses, and then uses them to his advantage.
All very impressive from a purely strategic strategic point of view, but morally despicable.
Totally. And it doesn't stop there. Even when he's in a duel, a fight where people can actually die, he turns it around to make himself look good.
How does he manage that?
After he wounds his opponent, he acts all magnanimous, all forgiving.
Classic manipulation. He's always in control of the narrative.
Always. And it's not just powerful men he manipulates. There's this young woman, she's called the Fair Bastard in the book, who's really vulnerable, and Fathom uses her inexperience and superstitions to take advantage of her.
He really does prey on the weak.
It's pretty awful. And then there's Mrs. Trapwell. She's married to this older guy, and she and Fathom have an affair.
So now he's a homewrecker.
Pretty much. And it doesn't end even after she goes back to London and to her husband.
It's like he has no respect for anyone or their commitments.
Right. It's always about what he wants.
Yeah.
And even when he's finally caught, arrested, facing all his creditors,
What does he do? Try to bribe them?
he tries to talk his way out of it, come up with some scheme to avoid the consequences.
So even when he's cornered, his first instinct is to lie and manipulate.
Yep.
It's like a compulsion.
Mm.
Even later, when he's in debtor's prison, his relationship with Ronaldo is completely messed up. Because of Monimia, he still can't stop scheming.
Monimia. Who's that?
We'll get to her.
Yeah.
She's a key character. But even when Fathom's at his lowest point, he tries to become a fake doctor, tries to use a woman named Miss Biddy for his own ends.
He's relentless.
He even thinks about maybe making up with Ronaldo, but only because he needs something. Eventually, he has a seizure, ends up back in prison.
Wow, what a ride. So he never really learns this lesson.
It doesn't seem like it. It's like he's stuck in this cycle of deception and self-destruction.
A very bleak view of human nature. But Smollett doesn't just show us Fathom, right? There are other characters, other stories happening alongside his.
Exactly. It's not all doom and gloom. There's this whole other storyline about Don Diego, a guy who's actually pretty virtuous.
Okay, so there's some balance, some hope. Yeah, Don Diego's story is all about virtue and misfortune and how even good people can get betrayed. We also meet Serafina and John Manuel de Mendoza, and their stories add even more layers to how the novel explores morality and relationships. Like, it's showing that even in a world with a guy like Fathom running around, there's still room for goodness, for genuine connection.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
I was starting to think this world was completely devoid of decent people.
And then there's Monimia. Remember her? She's connected to both Ronaldo and Fathom, and her story is just heartbreaking.
What happens to her?
She ends up dying, and it's all because of Fathom's actions, his manipulations. Ronaldo's devastated, obviously.
So we see the real cost of Fathom's choices.
Yeah.
Not just for him, but for innocent people caught in his web.
Exactly. It's a reminder that those choices have real consequences, real pain attached to them.
So listeners, as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, keep a few things in mind. Smollett's giving us this incredibly detailed picture of how deception works, how societal structures can either help or hinder people, and the huge impact of the moral choices we make.
Now, get ready for a total shift in perspective as we move from 18th century scheming to cosmic wisdom.
We're going from the world of Ferdinand Count Fathom to the realm of the law of one.
It's a big leap.
It is. But hopefully by putting these two things together, we can illuminate both of them in new ways. So the law of one, it's channeled material, meaning it's supposed to be coming from a source beyond our normal human perception.
And that source calls itself Ra.
Right, and Ra presents this concept of the law of one, which basically says that everything in creation is interconnected, ultimately part of the same source. And that source, that ultimate unity, it's driven by love. Like, love is the fundamental energy of existence.
That's a pretty radical idea when you think about it, especially compared to Fathom's world where everyone's just out for themselves.
Totally different perspectives. But Ra doesn't deny the reality of our experience, even if it's driven by ego and separation and all that. They say it's an illusion, but an illusion that's incredibly complex, you know?
So we're kind of trapped in this illusion of separateness, even though at a deeper level we're all connected.
And the way out of this illusion, it's not just about knowledge or intellect. It's about tapping into that deeper connection, that love that Ra talks about. Practices like meditation, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. And then there's this really intriguing idea that Ra introduces, the concept of wanderers.
Wanderers. Tell me more.
So according to Ra, there are these beings from other densities, other realms of existence, who choose to incarnate on Earth. They come here to be of service to humanity.
So they're like volunteers coming to help us out.
That's the idea. And Ra estimates there are millions of them here right now, like 65 million or something.
Wow, that's a lot of cosmic helpers. But why wouldn't they just, come right out and say who they are, start fixing things?
Well, there's a catch. When they incarnate into this third density reality, they experience this forgetting. They lose their conscious memory of who they are and what they came here to do. So they're kind of playing on hard mode. They're here to help, but they don't even remember their mission.
And it's a risky mission, too. If they get too caught up in this world, in the illusions and dramas of third density, they can end up accumulating karma.
Karma, like the consequences of their actions.
Exactly. It can delay their return to their home density until they've balanced things out. So it's a real act of service. And speaking of service, that's what Ra says their whole purpose is in communicating with us.
To teach and learn the law of one.
Exactly. But they're not big on historical details.
Mhm.
They focus more on the philosophical side, the big picture stuff. They see this sharing of information as a way to help raise the vibration of those who receive it. The idea is that by illuminating even one part of the whole, you're benefiting everything.
That makes sense, like a ripple effect.
Right. And they do talk a little bit about their past interactions with Earth. Like apparently they contacted some Earth cultures around 11,000 years ago.
Really? What for? They wanted to help these cultures, technically, specifically with healing, using crystals and these special configurations of time and space. Ra actually says that the pyramids were built with their help.
Whoa, wait a minute. Are they saying the pyramids were built by aliens?
Not exactly aliens, more like beings from a higher density. And they say the pyramids were built using these forces of one, these energies that can heal the mind, body, and spirit. And get this, they say the stones are alive.
Alive. Like conscious.
In a way, they're talking about how the stones hold and transmit energy. It's a pretty different view from what we're used to.
For sure. So they helped build the pyramids, but what are they doing now?
Well, they talk about this group they're part of, called the Confederation of Planets. Their purpose is to respond to calls for help, but only when it aligns with the law of one and the free will of those they're helping.
So they won't interfere unless they're asked.
Right. It's all about respecting free will. And they contrast themselves with another group, the Orion group, who are not so benevolent. They're all about conquest and control.
Oh, great. So we've got cosmic, good guys and bad guys.
It's not quite that simple, but you get the idea.
So we've got these different groups operating at these different levels of, let's call it spiritual evolution. How do they explain that?
Ra talks about density levels. They're like stages of consciousness. First density is the most basic, like minerals and water, just beginning to develop awareness. Then second density, that's where plants and animals are. They're growing and moving, but not yet self-aware in the way we are.
And third density.
That's us. That's us. Third density is where self-awareness develops, where we have free will and the potential to evolve spiritually. And Ra says the transition from third to fourth density, it's called the harvest. It's like a graduation of sorts. And it happens at the end of these big cycles, something like 75,000 years.
So we're due for a harvest.
According to Ra, yeah. We're in the middle of a transition period, and they talk about how important it is to understand the energy centers within our being, the rays.
Rays. Like light rays.
Kind of. Think of them more like energy centers or chakras. They govern different aspects of our being. The blue ray, for example, is about communication, how we express ourselves. The indigo ray, it's linked to the pineal gland and the influx of intelligent energy, the potential to connect to what they call intelligent infinity.
So the indigo ray is like the key to higher consciousness.
You could say that. And Ra says that blockages in these energy centers can really mess with our experiences and our ability to connect to higher awareness.
So we got to keep those energy centers clear.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're in this cosmic free-for-all with these different groups vying for influence, who's making sure things stay fair?
Ra mentions these guardians, these higher density beings who've created a kind of quarantine around Earth. They're protecting our free will, making sure no one group can totally dominate or control us.
So they're like referees, keeping the playing field level.
Exactly. It's not about completely stopping the Orion group, but making sure we have a genuine choice.
Makes sense. So these density levels, they're not just arbitrary categories, right? They're actual vibrational states with different colors and qualities.
That's what Ra says. Each density has its own color frequency and set of characteristics. First density is red, very basic, focused on survival. Second is orange, it's about growth and movement. And third is yellow, where self-consciousness and social structures emerge. Each density is defined by its primary color, but also influenced by the color of the next density as it evolves.
Fascinating. So what about the stuff we experience in life? The good, the bad, the ugly?
Yeah.
How does that fit into this whole scheme?
Ra calls those experiences catalyst. They're what help us evolve, make choices, and ultimately decide whether we're going to be more service to self or service to others.
So it's like life is throwing us these challenges to see how we respond.
Exactly. And the big dramatic events like natural disasters or wars, they're not necessarily planned. Ross says they're more like symptoms of a difficult harvest period.
So it's not some cosmic punishment or anything.
Right. It's more like growing pains, a collective struggle to evolve.
And how does this all work on an individual level? Like, how do we learn from these experiences?
Ross says our entire being, our mind, body, and spirit, it all acts as a resource for our higher self.
Our higher self.
It's like the part of us that's always connected to that source, the law of one, even when we're not consciously aware of it. And our higher self, it uses the experiences we have in third density to learn and grow, to plan for future experiences. It's a constant cycle of evolution.
So even when we feel lost and confused, there's a part of us that's always learning and growing. That's comforting.
It is. And even those wanderers who came here to help, they can get caught up in the illusion too.
Really? I thought they were supposed to be more evolved.
They are, but they're still vulnerable to the forgetting. And ironically, the intense experiences of third density, they can actually help wanderers remember who they are and accelerate their evolution.
So the challenges are also opportunities.
Exactly. It all depends on how we respond to them.
So what about those negative fourth density planets? What are those like?
Ra doesn't go into a lot of detail, but it sounds like they're pretty intense with a lot of conflict and struggle. It's a very different path from the one we're hopefully heading towards.
I'll take Raz's word for it. I don't need to experience that.
Mm.
So back to this idea of interconnectedness. How does Ra explain that?
They use these terms sublogoi and sub-sublogoi. Basically, it's like a hierarchy of interconnected beings, with each level being a part of a larger whole.
Like those Russian dolls where you open one and there's another inside and another.
Exactly. So we, as individual mind, body, spirit complexes, we're like sub-sub-logo. Our sun is a sub-logos, and our galaxy is a logos. It's all connected. And Ra says this conscious awareness of the choice between service to self and service to others, it really begins when we hit third density.
So that's when things get real, cosmically speaking.
Right. That's when we're really challenged to choose our path. And the violet ray, that's the energy that integrates all the other rays. It's like the sum total of our being.
So it's like the final stage of integration.
In a way, yeah. And Ross says that energy transfer between beings, it becomes easier in the higher densities, like fourth, fifth, and sixth, especially for those who've chosen a service to others path.
Because they're more aligned energetically.
Exactly. And they talk about how healing work, like what they were doing with the pyramids, it's all about manipulating energy to help people heal.
So the pyramids were like giant healing machines.
That's what Ross suggests. They say the king's chamber and the queen's chamber, they were designed for specific energetic purposes.
It's making more and more sense why they said the stones are alive.
Right. It's not just about the physical structure. It's about the energy that the structure holds and transmits. And they talk about how we actually choose our experiences before we're even born, making these pre-incarnative agreements to attract specific types of catalyst.
So we're choosing our challenges before we even get here.
That's the idea. It's about setting ourselves up for growth.
And what about all this talk about psychic attacks and stuff? Is that a real thing?
Rice says it is. They're very careful about how they communicate because they don't want to interfere with our free will. And they warn about the dangers of contacting higher density beings without proper precautions, like making sure their intentions are pure.
So not all higher density beings are friendly.
Right. It's like anything else, there's a spectrum. And finally, they talk about this veiling process that happens when we're born into third density.
Veiling process. What's that?
It's like a kind of amnesia where we forget our connection to the source, to the law of one. It makes things more challenging, but it also intensifies the learning process and gives us more opportunities to choose our path.
It's like we're playing this cosmic game on hard mode.
Exactly. So how do we connect all of this back to Ferdinand Count Fathom and his crazy escapades? What does an 18th century con man have to do with cosmic wisdom?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right. But I think there's a lot we can learn by putting these two seemingly unrelated things together. Like, could we see Fathom as an example of someone who's totally entrenched in that service-to-self polarity that Ro talks about?
It makes sense. He's constantly manipulating, exploiting others, always focused on his own gain. He doesn't care who he hurts as long as he gets what he wants.
And his tactics, all that deception and trickery, it seems like the opposite of the law of one, right? Like he's deliberately creating separation and disharmony.
Exactly. He's totally blind to the interconnectedness that Ray talks about. He sees other people as objects, as obstacles to overcome, not as part of the same universal energy. And the way he just avoids any kind of suffering or hardship, it's like he's refusing to participate in this shared human experience.
And what about the society he lives in? All those rigid hierarchies, the emphasis on social status. Does that play into this idea of illusion and separation?
Absolutely. Those structures create artificial divisions between people, reinforce the idea that some are better than others. And in Fathom's world, those structures become just another tool for manipulation. Like he can't even access certain levels of society because of his birth.
Right. And Ra talks about how these social structures, these rules and hierarchies, they can contribute to the forgetting that wanderers experience. Like, it's hard to remember your true nature, your connection to the source, when you're constantly bombarded with messages about competition and status and material gain.
It's like the system itself is designed to keep us trapped in the illusion.
And the characters in Ferdinand Count Fathom, they go through some pretty intense experiences. Betrayals, losses, emotional turmoil. Does that fit with what Ross says about Catalyst and how it helps us evolve?
Totally. Those are all opportunities for growth, for making choices that will either lead them towards service to self or service to others. Like Don Diego, he faces all these challenges with integrity even when he's betrayed. He's choosing a different path than Fathom.
And Fathom, he just keeps doubling down on his service to self orientation, even when it leads to suffering for himself and everyone around him.
He's a great example of what happens when you choose that path. It's like he's stuck in a cycle of deception and self-destruction.
And it's not just about the choices, it's about the motivation behind them, right? Like, why do people do the things they do?
That's key. Fathom, he's driven by pure self-interest. Power, wealth, status, that's all he cares about. The wanderers, on the other hand, they're motivated by a desire to serve, to help others evolve.
Two completely different approaches to life, mirroring those two paths of service to self and service to others.
And it makes you wonder, right? Are we all just playing out these cosmic roles, making these choices that determine